Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am still Brady Ryan, manager at CoMotion Labs, and this is our second to last installment of our brand new series focused on hardware entrepreneurship. CoMotion Labs, you've heard this before, is UW's multi-industry incubation environment for Seattle and UW's innovation community. We provide critical infrastructure like desks and wet lab space and prototyping space, as well as education, mentoring, networking, help with fundraising. Whatever you need, we do our best. We don't take equity, we don't take IP, we just exist to provide co-working incubation for the best startups in Seattle, regardless if they spun out of the UW or out of somebody's garage. We're doing this hardware series because we just launched our brand new hardware incubator, unofficially dubbed Hardware Hall. We have desks and workbenches, so you can do everything from your accounting to your prototyping. And we have shared equipment like 3D printers, SLA printers, laser cutter, circuitry rework area. We have conference rooms, phone booths, coffee, a lounge, all of that stuff that you would expect from a co-working space. We also have connections to machine shops on campus and other folks to help get stuff done for you quickly. We're also building a bunch of relationships with consultants, design houses, print shops, everybody in the ecosystem, so we can make good connections for you when you need them. So we opened about 3 weeks ago with 2 companies moving in, and we're bringing a third next week and a fourth and a fifth in the next month or so after that. We have a pretty big wait list, but please do reach out if you want to chat. We're always looking to find more startups. We're looking to talk to interesting people and learn. So next, I'll introduce you to our co-host, Harinderpal Hanspal, or Hans to his friends. He's the leader of a fantastic meetup group called the IIT Hub that I hope everyone has already joined. And if not, you should join that. He's incredibly well networked, incredibly helpful guy. And so, Hans, to you.
Thank you, Brady. As Brady mentioned, I lead the Seattle-based IIT Hub meetup group. We're a community of technologists, entrepreneurs. We have corporate innovators, a lot of industry experts as well, and executives and students who want to connect, share, and learn how IoT and Industry 4.0 technologies will shape our lives, communities, jobs, and industries. Our members represent technology, industrial, and manufacturing companies. Many of them are Seattle-based and range from startups to global industrial companies. We switched to virtual in April, and since then, we've been getting members from all over the world as well. Our community has been in existence for about 4.5 years, and we're approaching 3,900 members, making us one of the largest IoT and Industry 4.0 focused meetup communities in the country. Our meetups cover topics with all the usual IoT buzzwords, edge computing, 5G, edge to cloud, digital twins, pick your favorite buzzword, we cover it. Since IoT has a potential to impact every aspect of our personal and professional and citizen lives, we generally tend to organize our meetups around best practices, lessons learned, and not so much on just the technology itself. Topics have included smart manufacturing, digital manufacturing. We did an event on digital manufacturing that had over 100 people. Those events tend to be more popular than the tech ones, so we do more of those. And most recently, we started doing these connected hardware meetups, and I'm happy to partner with Brady and UW CoMotion Labs for these meetups. We're doing them because there's many IoT companies that need to build some connected widget, and if you look at the analyst data out there, I've shared this in past events, it doesn't really look good for a hardware startup in terms of being able to get from idea to scale. So the goal with these meetups is to really help you figure out what you need to do to turn your idea into a real business. Not necessarily how to do the technology, but figure out how to get it designed, how to get it built, business model, how to get it funded. In terms of events, we have events coming up tomorrow. It's going to be with Len Jordan of Madrona Venture Group. If you're not familiar with Madrona is the largest of the early stage VCs here in Seattle. In fact, if you're familiar with the Snowflake IPO this week, the biggest ever software IPO, They were one of the investors. And he's going to be sharing his perspective on what they've learned. They've invested in pretty much the whole IoT stack, including hardware. So he's going to share with us essentially what they've learned, where things are in terms of fundraising in the middle of COVID, and what things look like down the road. So check it out. Join our meetup group. It's on meetup.com, and just look for IIT Hub Seattle. And if you're interested in interested in speaking, please reach out to me. And there's a whole bunch of different series that we're working on, and I can share that with you. With that, I'll hand it back to Brady.
Thank you so much. So a couple things before we jump in. Use the chat box. I love the chat box on this series. People are getting to know each other. People are meeting each other, getting help, finding jobs, asking questions. Please do use that. It's a pretty cool community that we've brought together on this series. Next week is our last talk in the series. I have a sad face emoji in my talking points, but luckily it's also the first in our regular Fundamentals for Startup series, which then has a happy face emoji. This is our series that is not focused on hardware, not necessarily focused on software, broader topics that are of interest to most entrepreneurs, we think. So on Wednesday, for the last one of this series, Marco Micheletti, who's the automation director at Fresh Consulting, is presenting designing and developing hardware for manufacturing and scalability, kind of our DFM talk. And then on Friday, for our normal fundamental series, Jim Katsandri is the Director of Development Relations at Bluetooth SIG, will present the latest advancements in Bluetooth technology and its rapid growth in non-consumer devices. All of these events and our normal fundamental events are available online on the CoMotion website under lab/startup training videos, as well as on YouTube. And for our full schedule of events and to register for future events, go to comotion.uw.edu/events. So today, Ryan Shimizu is here to present Hardware versus Software is a False Choice. Hardware-enabled services is the future. As the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Igor Institute, Ryan helps to develop new partners and relationships within the product development ecosystem. With a marketing and entrepreneurship degree from the University of Washington, Ryan previously worked in advertising, helping lead ad agencies in the Pacific Northwest. Working with the leadership team at Igor, Ryan helps identify strategic opportunities for growth and brings his knowledge of marketing to help hardware companies launch products and connect with resources needed for success. Ryan will take questions via chat or email, info on the screen. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I will now turn the event over to Ryan.
Thank you, Brady, for the opportunity to speak about hardware versus software, and also for establishing or helping to establish the hardware incubator at UW. I'm very excited for the hardware incubator. I look forward to engaging with the community and making hardware development in the Pacific Northwest more prominent. And real quick, just to plug your speaker next week, Mark was a great speaker, and I'm kind of bummed that I'm unfortunately not going to be able to attend that speech, but do check it out. It'll be worthwhile. Okay, so hardware versus software. I was first approached by Brady a few months ago to talk about the differences between software and hardware. And while there are clearly some obvious differences, physical products versus digital products, the reality is these lines are getting more blurred by the day. Just think about all the physical products that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. You'd be hard-pressed to find any product that someone somewhere is not trying to make smart or get connected to the internet. From the clothes you wear to the Tupperware you store your leftovers, to yoga mats and herb gardens, someone is working on connecting it to the internet and making it smart. And because the tech is getting so good and more affordable, and the knowledge more readily available, barriers to hardware coming down, companies and startups that began as software-only organizations are now getting into the hardware game. They're realizing that purpose-made hardware can provide a richer experience for their users when paired with their software. In the last 5+ years, and even more than that, there's really not a hardware product out there that we get asked to work with on that's not connected in some fashion. And really, that's because the ability for connected hardware to provide incredible consumer experiences and the ability for it to enable new business models has really led to the proliferation of hardware-enabled services, which is what I wanted to talk to you guys today about. A little bit about me. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Igor Institute. I've been with Igor since the start of 2017. Before joining Igor, I was working in marketing and advertising. I spent time at the digital agency Top in Seattle, where we built digital products, websites, and a lot of digital marketing campaigns. A lot of what I was doing in the marketing and advertising space felt a little bit removed from the actual products or services that we were marketing. And so, although I'm a big believer in marketing and advertising as a driver for business, feeling removed from the actual development of the products or services made me want to seek out opportunities closer to product development. And so when the opportunity came to join Igor Institute and help develop physical products, I jumped at the opportunity and absolutely love working in the hardware space. Quickly about Igor Institute. We're a 30-person hardware product development consultancy based in Seattle and San Francisco. We're actually planning on opening an office in Vancouver, BC here shortly. We're headquartered in downtown Seattle in Pioneer Square. We're a team of mechanical, electrical, firmware, and software engineers and product leaders. We get brought in to help engineer and manufacture consumer electronics and connected hardware. We do a lot of wearables, some medical devices, and are fairly good at what we call human factors engineering. These, what you see here on the screen are just some of the clients that we've worked with throughout the years. Okay. So this was a slide that Chrissy Meyer from Root Ventures presented a few weeks ago in this hardware series. And I saw her present this slide and I asked if I could borrow it because it pretty perfectly encapsulates what I wanted to talk to you today about. And that's hardware-enabled services or hardware plus services that you see here on the screen. Quick recap of this slide for context. This was a slide that highlights the hardware business models that are attractive to Chrissy and Root VC down in the Bay Area. And the fact that they are bullish on hardware and services aligns perfectly with what we're seeing as a product development consultancy and the types of projects that we're being asked to work on. And Apple last week, they announced a handful of new products and new hardware, but the biggest announcement and what everybody's talking about are their services. So it's pretty telling when one of the world's leading innovative hardware developers most talked about offering in their product launches are services, not actually hardware. So a little bit more context on this slide. These other 4 business models, pure hardware, we do get asked to work on this as well, but as I said in the beginning, you'll be hard pressed to find someone somewhere not trying to make that pure hardware play into a hardware and a service. Hardware and consumables, think Keurig. We work on these types of products as well. PAX is a client of ours, which is the cannabis equivalent of Juul. The biggest drawback and the reason why I like hardware-enabled services more so than the consumables is one big important difference, and that's really just trash. As a product development consultancy, a lot of what we do at the end of the day, unfortunately, ends up in a landfill. And so, if we can do things to lessen that, that's better. And the last piece there, hardware as a services, it's very interesting. These are typically, bigger purchase items, so you don't come across these opportunities as often. And just so I guess the impact that hardware as a service could potentially have isn't as great, I feel, as hardware-enabled services for consumers. So I touched on earlier how the lines are getting blurred. In companies that started as software companies are developing their own hardware. And I think all successful startups and entrepreneurs, they don't begin by thinking, I'm going to make a hardware product or I'm going to make a software product. They start by thinking about solving real problems. And I think all the successful startups are laser focused on the problems that they're trying to solve, and they're really good at solving that one problem. And they all start by asking the same questions. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Is it an actual problem or just a perceived problem? Everyone's heard of the stories of companies that wasted a lot of resources over engineering and solving problems that in the end didn't need to be solved. Who are you solving this problem for? Who's the customer? Is the customer the end user? Not all customers are end users. Why does this problem need to be solved? This is one that I think doesn't get asked often as it should. I see it somewhat as the forcing function to determine if the problems that you're solving are actual problems or perceived problems. It also helps investors and other stakeholders understand your motivations behind why you want to build this product and solve this particular problem. Not every problem needs to be world changing or world saving. Obviously, those are great to try and solve. But real problems could be, helping people learn how to play music better or learning how to speak a new language. Those are real problems that exist, and startups are using technology to solve those problems. And lastly, of course, how are we going to solve it? What's our proposed solution? What is the product that we will endeavor to make? So products, especially hardware products, we think of them as journeys. They take a lot of time and effort to get off the ground. And I would say more so in hardware. We've all heard the saying, hardware is hard. And at Igor, a hardware development consultancy, we get paid to help people build hardware. We tell our clients this all the time. If you can do it with software, do it with software. If you don't have to build hardware, don't build hardware. We laugh because it's a great way to not get business, but it's also the truth. We want our clients to be, clear-eyed about the journey that they'll be starting, and we want to be transparent that this stuff is not easy. This is complicated stuff. So if you haven't gone through it before, I will venture to say you will make mistakes. You are going to slip in your schedule. The world's best hardware developers don't get it right 100% of the time. So you can't expect to get it right if you haven't done it before. And this is not to say that software engineering is easy, but really there are just certain things that you can't get away with in hardware that you can get away with in software. And so if you're going to do hardware, here are the basic high-level activities that go into launching a hardware startup. Some are similar to activities in a software startup, but there are certain things that are inherently unique to hardware because you're dealing with physical products. So the design and development of a hardware product generally takes longer than software. How you go about designing and developing your idea into a physical prototype is a little different from how you design a digital prototype for the simple fact that you're dealing with the physical world. There are more steps involved in hardware design and development that I'll get into in actually a little more detail in the next slide. But one of the biggest differences is just the level of effort in terms of schedule, cost, and just overall effort. Hardware tends to take longer, require more resources than software. Testing is more or less the same. You make something, you got to test how it works, digital or physical. I will say you're doing a lot more testing in hardware than software. You cannot ship 80% of a hardware product and then update it in the field. When you launch a hardware product, it needs to be on point. It needs to be working exactly how your consumer intends it to work. Otherwise, they're going to get a bad experience and they never buy a product from you again. These next three are somewhat unique to hardware that software startups don't have to worry about that much at all. Manufacturing and tooling. This is unique to physical products. You have to spin up a factory, cut tools to be able to manufacture at scale a hardware product. Technology has helped to make this a little easier and help bring down some barriers to the manufacturing process. Supply chain management. You need to ensure that you have components and ingredients for your hardware device, or you can't make them. And lastly, fulfillment. Once you've manufactured your product, you need to package it, you need to ship it to distribution channels. Software startups obviously need to have a sales channel as well, but the shipping and logistics are somewhat unique to hardware. Okay, so digging into the design and development of hardware, here's a high-level view of how we think of the different product development phases in hardware. In general, at a high level, I would say these phases are the same as any product development consultancy would go through, whether you're developing hardware or software. There are more steps in hardware you need to consider, but generally, if you think about it, you got to figure out what problems you're solving. What are you building? You need to make it, you need to test it and refine it, and then you need to scale it. So it's kind of the same with hardware or software. Touching on each one of these phases, phase 0, I would say is the exact same for hardware or software. In fact, some of the folks that we worked with, some of our design partners that do both hardware and software design in these early concept definition phases, the work is more or less the same that you're going through, whether it's hardware or software. The question that we're answering here is, what are we building? And the objective is to determine the customer needs and come up with the product function and form. Typical deliverables in this phase are renders, design definitions, user journeys, basically detailing here what the customer experience is and how the product will be used by the consumers. Phase 1, architecture and feasibility, very important to determining how the rest of the project will go. All phases are important, but having a solid technology architecture will help set up the project for success. In this phase, we're figuring out how we'll actually build the product, what components are we using, what's off the shelf and what needs to be custom. Deliverables in this phase are a preliminary costed BOM or bill of materials, a product requirements document or a PRD. And this is important because it's more of a technical document that details what the product needs to adhere to, whether it's how much power is required in milliamps or the size of the payload that needs to be uploaded or downloaded. Technical bits that help the engineers understand what is it that we're building. Phase 2, NFF or near form factor, is the first prototype that we're putting together with the actual components that will be used in the final product. It's just not in its final form factor that the product will be sold in. It's typically a benchtop prototype with a larger than normal PCB to allow for rework and engineering work to be done on it. The thing that we're trying to do here is verify if the architecture that we've developed in the previous phase will actually work in the prototype. Phase 3 is when we develop the form factor prototype, or the looks like prototype. It's the first time we're seeing the product in its desired form in the physical space, not just a rendering. Ideally, in this phase, we're starting conversations with a CM or a contract manufacturer because we'd like to enter the next phase, phase 4, with the CM already selected, as we'd ideally look to do the design for manufacturing work with the actual factory that's putting these things together. So phase 4, DFX, DFX stands for design for anything, design for environment, and design for end of life. Design for manufacturing, DFM, is typically what people are talking about in this phase here. Cost down, yield up is sort of the mantra here in this design for X phase. That's ultimately what we're trying to do, is get the cost down and the yields to come up off the line. And the last phase, phase 5, is your test ramp. This is the last thing before mass production. It's really a series of validation tests that one goes through at the factory to ensure the product is engineered properly, and the manufacturing process is validated, and everything is working as expected. A lot of startups actually tend not to understand this last phase, phase 5, and then they'll start to ship their EVT, DVT, or PVT units, and then they get a lot of those units returned. And it's because you're not shipping an actual product yet. It's still somewhat a prototype because you're in your test ramp phase. And so the earlier phases of design and development here, the phases on the top, is where technology has really helped to improve the process. It allows you to do things like quickly 3D print parts or components, put together hacked prototypes using a Raspberry Pi or other modules. But those early prototypes can only take you so far. A hacked together prototype is not a product, and the level of effort it takes to make a prototype mass manufacturable is often drastically underestimated and taken for granted. And because a hacked together prototype is far from becoming an actual product, we think there's no MVP in hardware. Think about any physical product you buy. If it didn't have the fit and finish that it did, if it were only minimally viable, would you have spent your money to buy it? We don't want minimal viable hardware products. We want something that is compelling at the least. I think we're okay with MVP software because software is relatively new to humans as a species, but we've interacted with the physical world from the beginning, and so we have much more of an emotional response to tactile things, to things that we can pick up and hold. Much more of an emotional response to physical products, I would say. So we like to think about hardware development as something, as coming up with something that's the minimal compelling product. What is the thing I can get out there that would still be compelling enough for people to spend their hard-earned money on? We don't want MVP hardware. We want something that's compelling. And sure, it may seem like a nuanced choice of words, but what we're really getting at is this idea of agile hardware development, and what does that mean? There's really no true agile hardware development in the same sense that there is agile software development. There's technology that simplified the process and made it easier to develop hardware, but in hardware development, many times you can't throw more bodies at a problem or make things go faster. Because you're dealing with the physical world, things just take time. You get physical samples shipped to you or printed, and you got to evaluate those parts. You got to fabricate PCBs and put everything together and then test it. If you had a lot of resources, you could have multiple teams working on different concepts, but agile hardware development does not exist in the same sense that software agile development exists. But technology exists to make it easier. I'm telling you all these things about hardware, and it seems like, why would anybody get into hardware? Why not just do software? And it's because of the experiences that you can enable with hardware and services. I think are far greater than the experiences that you can enable with either on their own. And so, coming back to these activities for hardware startups, technology is making it easier to develop prototypes and POCs. So while it's complicated, it is getting better. Many of the major components are commoditized and off the shelf. There are modules readily available that come prepackaged with a lot of these components you'd expect in any consumer electronic device. Crowdfunding exists to help make it more easy to fund production or gauge market interest. And a quick note on crowdfunding, while it does make it easier to fund hardware projects, the absolute best use of crowdfunding to us is really just using it as a marketing tactic and not as a way to fund actual development. A lot of times we see startups use crowdfunding to validate the market for investors. Some investors want to see pre-orders before investing. Others are just curious about market validation and use successful crowdfunding campaigns as another data point. But really, you should find another way to fund the NRE, or non-recurring engineering costs, basically your upfront engineering and development costs, separately from the crowdfunding, and use the crowdfunding funds to pay for production units. That's the best use of crowdfunding funds. Rapid prototyping and 3D printing is widely available and to aid in developing prototypes. You have more manufacturing choices, both domestically and overseas. Logistics and customer fulfillment has been greatly simplified. It's easier to get in sales channels. You don't have to necessarily get into Best Buy anymore. D2C is super popular. You're obviously selling through Amazon. And so while it's become easier to develop prototypes and POCs for hardware, and the lines between hardware and software continually get more blurred, the things you can do with hardware and software that you cannot do with either on its own, is what makes hardware-enabled services really interesting right now. So we're at the perfect intersection of hardware and software to realize new business models and new experiences that will drive innovation for the foreseeable future. And what hardware-enabled services does is take the best of both worlds of hardware and software and combine them into a compelling business proposition. You can sell amazing hardware and benefit from a software subscription and have monthly reoccurring revenue that investors love, and it creates a sticky product that your consumers will enjoy. And so a great example of this is Peloton. At its core, it's an exercise bike, but the reason people love their Peloton is the community and competition aspect that the software enables. It's the experience of both the hardware and software that it's sticky and it keeps people loving their Peloton. Going back to the idea of an MVP, I don't own a Peloton. I don't know anybody who works there or have any insight into how it was developed. But I'll bet some of the first prototypes were a regular exercise bike with some laptop or a screen attached to it, which is a far way away from what they're actually selling for $2,500. I'll bet if they released the MVP that was just an exercise bike with a laptop, nobody would pay $2,500 for it. And just as a category, home fitness is an area where we're seeing lots of innovation. There's other companies, Mirror, Tonal, Zwift, are good examples of this home fitness trend that we're seeing. And then the fact that obviously Apple last week announced their Fitness Plus subscription is validating for the industry as a whole. Another good example of a hardware-enabled service is Woop. Woop made headlines recently as a solution for the NFL to detect COVID in their players. These are a class of wearable and medical device that we call consumer medical. It's essentially a non-invasive miniature medical device, usually worn on the human body, provides diagnostic information, and can lead to improved health outcomes. In this case, for the NFL, it's early warning signs for COVID. Woop charges for the device as well as a monthly subscription to keep track of your health, your sleep, and analyze that data. The Apple Watch, again, is another example of a consumer medical device that will spur a ton of innovation in the healthcare space. And we're seeing more and more of these types of consumer medical devices, and it's easy to see why, right? The benefits to individual people, to their health, to society is clearly evident, and we're really just scratching the surface of what's possible here. And hardware-enabled services don't all have to be health and wellness focused. Those first two were. Here's a company, Mural. It's a startup that allows anyone to subscribe to art. They tout $3 billion worth of art in one digital frame. You just pay for the connected frame and the monthly subscription. You have access to artwork that might have otherwise been inaccessible to you. So hardware-enabled services don't have to be life-saving or world-changing. It can be as simple as opening up new business models that weren't available before. And this is Wise Labs. They're a Seattle startup that's doing quite well in hardware. They make security and outdoor cameras, scales, smart clocks. They even make fitness wearables as well, all at a more affordable price. As with all hardware-enabled services, they sell their hardware and also offer a monthly subscription to store more video footage, to enable remote connectivity and monitoring, and other add-on services in addition to the hardware that they sell. So you start to see the different types of services that can be offered with hardware, and with the right subscription model, like Peloton, Woop, Mural, or Wise, you can see how the additional monthly revenue stream can make for a very attractive business that's generating more revenue than simply selling a hardware product. And you're also not producing trash like you would with the hardware and consumable products. So again, it's taking the best of both worlds of hardware and software, and giving people a physical product that they can interact with while offering a data service that provides increased value. So those are just a handful of the many hardware-enabled services that combine the emotional connection and appeal of a physical hardware device with the smarts of software. It gives you some idea of the types of incredible experiences that you can create with some creativity and know-how. And some practical advice if you're developing hardware: focus on the core benefits and needs of your customers. Anything else, leave for the roadmap. As complicated as hardware development is, you can't afford to lose focus on the core of your product. You can get lost in scope creep, and hardware already takes a lot longer than software, so you're making it harder for yourself by not focusing. Although there is no true agile hardware development, adopting an agile mindset in hardware can help you prototype more quickly. What are some off-the-shelf components or existing products that you can hack together to test your concept? What exists out in the world already that can help you prototype the experience you're trying to develop? Just like you don't have to have an app to test the software product with users, you can do it with wireframes and PowerPoints, etc. You don't have to build a custom prototype to test your novel hardware concept. There are creative ways to put together proof of concepts utilizing existing products and components. And it becomes more of an integration exercise and putting together existing technology packaged in a unique way provides a new experience. Developing a solid technology architecture. In hardware, we like to say early decisions cast long shadows. So nailing down your tech architecture early on is very important. Bad decisions early could be very costly, and good decisions early could set the project up for success and make it go very smoothly. And lastly, add value to your hardware offering with services. Hardware-enabled services allows for interesting business models that combine traditional hardware sales with software subscriptions. What is the value-added service that can add to your hardware offering? Is it community and competition like Peloton? Data analysis like Woop? Storage capacity? Or is it just dreaming up a new novel experience that's unlike anything we've seen? So yeah, that's my talk on hardware-enabled services.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That was fascinating. It wasn't, we didn't design it this way, but anybody that tuned in last week to hear Chrissy talk about business models and then followed up with this, just a perfect handoff. It's great to hear those things twice. There's a lot more value in building something and then also getting your consumer to part with money each month. So thank you for that. One thing that stuck out to me, and please everybody get on the chat if you have questions. One thing that stuck out to me was your MVP discussion and what you called the minimum compelling product versus minimum viable product. I've also heard minimum lovable, and then in the chat, Luis Felipe Morales said he gives his customers a minimum valuable product. And I love that. And I think it's like you were saying in hardware, you can't ship updates, right? What you send out has to be a real shot on goal. Like the Peloton example you gave was great. Where, I mean, like the software industry MVP of that would have been an old exercise bike with an iPad duct taped to it, right? But that doesn't cut it in hardware. And I'm wondering if how big that margin is. I don't mean profit margin. I mean, what's that margin from a legitimate hardware MVP to not quite cutting it? Have you seen folks ship products that missed, one key feature or missed the mark by a couple degrees, but that stood in the way of adoption?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest offender of this, I would say, is just not shipping your EVT, DVT, PVT units, right? It's shipping your prototypes and not actual products, because as you're going through the product journey, those test ramp units are not final products yet. You're still working through the process. You're still working through the engineering to make sure that these things come off and are working as they should. And so I would say most often we just see products that just aren't finished. So they'll get upwards of 50% of the things that they sell returned simply because they didn't go through their final test ramp. They're shipping their prototypes essentially. And so to me, that happens a lot. And, it's unfortunate because, like you're saying, it's got to be a real shot on goal. And, and in the consumer electronics space, it's, oftentimes not cheap what you're selling. And so if a customer has a bad experience and they buy a product and it doesn't work and they have to return it, are they going to buy from you again? I don't know. So it's making sure that you are buttoned up and you have a full product, as opposed to, it's less about what features are in it and just making sure that the thing works, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah. I'm curious though, you said it's less about what's in it, but it's easy for software entrepreneurs, right? You ship it and then you update it and you keep going, right? But I imagine that if I was an entrepreneur and I'd been working on something for 2-3 years, I would tend to gild the lily. And does it come down to requirements that you write up before the process or throughout the process to know when you put down the pen and say, all right, this is what we're building for?
Yeah, I think that's where, a lot of the upfront work in the earlier phases, when you're doing your concept definition and you're working through the customer experience. If you really nail that early piece of it, that's what you're building, right? And if you can nail that piece of it, but add future features to the product roadmap, that's probably the right way to do it.
Yeah. I imagine that would be hard. Eric Bell asked, hi Eric, good to talk to you again. Have you ever seen a company offer the service first and the hardware later? It's always hardware plus services, but what about services plus hardware?
Yeah, I would say any company like Facebook comes to mind, just as a, they started as a social network and now they're producing a ton of hardware. So I would say the service that they offered was community. They brought people together, and that is an instance in where they created a community, and now they're offering hardware to service that community. So that's the first one that comes to mind. And yeah, I mean, could a startup effectively do that? I don't know. I'm trying to think of a startup that started as services that's not as big as like a Facebook. But I'm sure you can come up with the service first and then come up with hardware later. It would just need to be a pretty compelling service, and I think you can absolutely do it because it's been done before.
Yeah, sure. Question from battling 3 screens. from Stuart Marshall. How does unit economics fit into the design process? And do you have an example from your experience?
So everything has to work, make the business work, right? The unit economics is super important. You can't be making products where your business will be losing money. Like, that's not a smart way to do it. You're asking to fail, I think, in that regard. So it comes into play very early on in the process. Everything that you do should be driven by a business objective. So unit economics, we consider that from the very beginning, because if you can't produce your product at the price that the market would accept, I would say you're wasting a lot of time and effort to build something that is going to fail. So I would say that unit economics comes into play very early on, and it's super important and needs to be considered throughout the entire journey of the product.
Yeah, I feel like we're building toward a theme here. And this next question, I think, is going to hammer it home. But when I was listening to what you were talking about, some of the differences, it seemed like a lot of the unique issues to hardware or connected hardware startups kind of happen post-market. So the supply chain issues, shipping, packaging, repair, support, looks very different than a software company. And how many of those issues can be mitigated kind of before market?
All of them can be considered before you launch, and I think the most successful hardware companies do consider all of that. There obviously are certain things. COVID is a great example that you can't really plan for, and that throws a wrench into supply chains and shipping and fulfillment, and so. Something like that obviously is hopefully once in a lifetime event, but you can absolutely plan for right now we're working on a project that we know certain components there might be a global shortage of this certain component in the next 6 months, so we have to plan at least 6 months out to order these components, and so we're always thinking about the entire journey and what is required for a product and a business to be successful, and then what are the steps that we need to back out from that in order to make it happen.
Yeah. Question from Alexandra Hammerberg, welcome back, pointed out that working with product development firms can have a high barrier to entry cost-wise for startups. So how often does Igor work with early stage startups versus more established companies? Any guidance for how somebody who has maybe an at-home prototype or an idea can work with a firm like yours?
Yeah, good question. I would say with Igor specifically, probably half of our clients are early stage startups. The other half are like the Nikes and Packs and Renais. But I would say, reach out to different firms. It's our experience in talking with others, firms who do what we do. We want to help entrepreneurs. We want to see hardware get out in the world. Our engineers just love working on hardware, and so it's like, if it's something really interesting and we believe in the product, we believe in you, there are creative financing options that we've worked with early stage startups on. We've done work for equity, we've done work for royalties, and so it really depends on, and I know it's kind of a non-answer, but it really depends on each individual situation. And I know other firms like us operate the same way. If it's an interesting idea and we like it, we can get behind it. There's things that we can do to make it work financially for entrepreneurs and for early stage startups.
Perfect. That's what I like to hear. What do some of your favorite clients have in common? whether that's the way they approach the business or how they
Mhm.
prepare or how they work together. I mean, what do you see kind of recurring in the folks that you really like to work with?
It's just the mutual trust. I think those are the best relationships. Ones that, we're handling the engineering. They're subject matter experts about with their business, and so it's that healthy tension between the business needs, but also the product needs, and both should be working together to make the best products. And so it's that trust. If a client trusts us to do what we're good at, which is the hardware engineering and manufacturing support, and then we look to the clients as subject matter experts in their business. Those are the relationships that we like working with and tend to make successful products.
Yeah, that sounds nice. What does Seattle need? So we're here trying to build a hardware startup incubator, trying to connect folks, trying to figure out what the gaps in the ecosystem are. What do you see? Where can we step up? Where can this community that's on the chat right now step up to support each other? What do we need to take the next step as an ecosystem?
Yeah, great question, Brady. Thanks for that. I absolutely think the talent is here. I think there's no shortage of good ideas. The piece that I would say is missing in the Pacific Northwest are the investors. A lot of the hardware investors tend to be down in the Bay Area, and that's frankly why we have an office down there, is to be closer to where traditionally hardware development has been happening. Which is why we absolutely love the fact that this hardware incubator is happening here in Seattle and with the University of Washington, because it's the talent's here, the ideas are here. We just don't have the investors and the money yet, and so I think that's the piece that's missing. You're seeing more and more hardware being developed here in the Northwest, and really. Seattle and Washington, they've had a history of manufacturing and hardware. If you think about going back to Boeing and Microsoft in its early days was manufacturing all their accessories out of Washington State, and so there's quite a bit of a manufacturing or hardware history here in Seattle, and so it'd be great to get back to that. The piece that I think is missing right now is the investor piece.
Yeah, we hope to get back to that too. If anybody here knows a bunch of hardware investors that have a lot of money and want to write checks to companies, please let us know. We will give them all the deal flow they want. Ryan, really appreciate this. This was fantastic. Love that this happened to dovetail perfectly from last week's event. Love the insight you were able to give. Also, I'm just going to thank you personally. You were one of the first people that I connected with as I started digging in to hardware when I was moving out here and starting this thing, and you've been so helpful. I'm really appreciative, and I'm glad you got to meet some folks here through this, hopefully. So that's all we have time for, folks. Really appreciate you all tuning in. This was another very well attended event. Makes us think that we might be onto something with this whole hardware thing, so we're going to stick at it. There's an IIT Hub meetup event happening, I think Han said tomorrow. We'll get that information to you folks. Next week, the last event from this series, again, is going to be Marco Micheletti from Fresh Consulting, talking about designing and developing hardware for manufacturing and scalability, so DFM and DFX, I guess. Sign up for that, and then we'll see you all next week. Really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Bye.